Good morning, everyone, or the few of you that are here. Good thing we didn't book Andy Hayden Hall. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 1 and 2 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal if council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the application for zoning and 120 days for an official plan amendment. And a comment sheet is available over by that door. And if anybody has any motions, if you could submit them earlier rather than later, that would be great. Okay, regrets. We have Councillor Blais and Councillor Chiarelli have provided regrets today. Declarations of interest. Confirmation of minutes from the meeting of January 23rd, 2020. Carried. Response to inquiries. Oh, I should say that Councillor Suds, who is not on the committee but does have item number 2 and the inquiry today, called me last night to say that she is fully in, she's happy with the inquiry, she's fully in support of the application, and she's going to be out of town. So I promised I would pass that along. Okay. The first, so the response to inquiries, that was the Club Link application, right? If you saw that. So we have the first item up was deferred from the last meeting. The zoning bylaw amendment, 3809 Boris O'Kane Road. If you recall, we deferred it because the applicant had come in with some nuances that staff wanted a bit more time to look at. And so that's what we're dealing with. That's the new part of today, and we have it before us today. We have Sue Murphy's here and Hugo Lalonde. Yeah, so we're holding it anyway. They're here if we have questions, so we'll hold it because you had your finger up. Number 2 is the zoning bylaw amendment for 2505, 2707 Soland Road in Canada North, which I mentioned Councillor Suds is supportive of. Does anyone have any questions on number 2? No. And yeah, so we'll go back to item number 1. Lily? Okay, so Councillor Leeper has questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions on this one? No? Okay. Councillor Leeper?
Thanks. And I spent some time with the documents over the past couple of days, and I've got 2 sort of areas of concern. The first of which is I've been hearing assertions that this has moved in the wrong order, that it's premature to include the land within the general urban area because it hasn't been thoroughly studied through the CDP process, and therefore it's premature to do zoning amendments that would allow for residential uses on it. So I just want to make sure that I understand how this has played out. OPA 213 brought a number of lands into the urban boundary, including the subject property, but the subject property was designated sand and gravel resource area and developing community expansion area. So in the official plan today, it's not designated as general urban. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. There was an exception or a clause in the OPA that said 3809 Boris O'Kane could be considered general urban, subject to the it having been studied through the expansion lands CDP. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it does have the overlay that had these additional studies and plans that were associated with those lands.
And it wouldn't require an OPA once it's been studied as part of the expansion land CDP. It wouldn't require an OPA to become general urban.
That's right.
So the expansion lands CDP, or the expansion study area CDP went through, it included 3809 Boris O'Kane, but 3809 was simply labeled in the CDP as sand and gravel areas, I think.
Correct. Madam Chair, the CDP identified such way because of the land use at the time when CDP was completed.
Okay.
In the meanwhile, the official plan has a statement specifically says that to develop the subject land, an official plan amendment would not be required.
So the secondary plan, the CDP process moves ahead. This is referred to in that CDP as sand and gravel. Mattamy and Minto paid for the study, if I understand correctly, that deals with the lands to the sort of southeast of this particular property. And it was intensively studied. There's a full set of studies at a very granular level for the Mattamy and the Minto lands, but this property is still just land and gravel area in that CDP.
Madam Chair, the CDP process is very extensive with master studies such as environmental management plan, master surveying studies, and many other studies. And within all those studies, the pit lands, including the subject property, were included in those studies. So the existing conditions, the indications, recommendations were all came into a conclusion, and the guidance in terms of how development may proceed was included in those studies. And the subdivision review process was taking those recommendations and conclusions into consideration.
In the CDP process, did the Mattamy and Minto lands and this property receive the same level of granularity in terms of the rigor of those studies?
Most part, the only one part that is missing is it doesn't show the preliminary layout of the subdivision in the concept plan. But other than that, the studies considered all the lands equally.
Okay. So the servicing, parks, transportation, and environmental management plans are the same level of detail for, through the CDP, are the same level of detail for the Mattamy Minto lands and for this land as well?
Correct.
Okay. There is some concern. The stormwater management plan that's proposed for the subdivision is actually on the pit it's been moved to the pit that is to the west of the subject property, correct?
The original concept was 2 ponds. One is on the Drummond land, which is to the north of the subject site. The other one is on the subject site. Through the subdivision, because of the Drummond lands was going through the rehabilitation plan, actually they just got a license surrender yesterday. So it was determined that it's reasonable to combine the 2 ponds into one, so it will minimize the cost and the impacts to the environment.
So there is some concern with the stormwater management plan on the pit to the west. I guess it's properly referred to as the Brazo pit?
The pond is to the northwest.
Outside the urban boundary. Okay. Yeah, the property straddles the line, but the stormwater management pond, there is one that is to the west of the urban boundary within the property.
Can I just ask, some of these questions, will all of them actually relate to emails we received from Paul Johannes?
I've seen Mr. Johannes's one email.
And I think we've got about 3 that staff have responded to with this information, I think, isn't it? I just wanted to, because when you're talking almost in the third person, so I'm just asking, you said,
yeah, and
that's why I'm asking.
I only really had a chance to delve into this yesterday, so I just want to confirm
I'll make sure that I
understanding.
find those responses and give them to you.
Okay.
Okay?
But if I may just ask,
Yeah,
the
go
stormwater
ahead.
management plan is, stormwater management pond, there is a stormwater management pond on this property on the west side of the urban expansion boundary?
The proposed pond for this development through the subdivision review process will be located to the northwest of the property within the, adjacent to the urban boundary within the Drummond pit land.
Okay. That is, that's close to the Cambrian natural feature area. What kind of study has been done to understand the effect of the proximity of the stormwater pond to the Cambrian natural feature, the forest?
Madam Chair, the moving the pond by perhaps 150 meters to the north, closer to the Cambrian wood, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will cause negative impacts to the Cambrian wood. The impacts to the wood is more based on the pre-development and the post-development balances in terms of groundwater infiltration and the surface drainage. And this information is reviewed through the engineering design as the draft approval stage, and it will be further refined during the detailed design stage.
How were the locations of the stormwater pond for this property considered when you were doing the, when we were doing the expansion study area CDP?
At the CDP stage, it was considering the timing of the development and the land ownership, as well as the grading and the other site context.
Okay. The, okay. If I can, I want to move, you just mentioned that the license to surrender was granted, and I want to try to understand that process as well, because I still don't understand from our council meeting at which some of these questions were addressed. Who gets to say that the resource is exhausted? There was some back and forth. This is there is a gravel pit here. In 2017, Patterson said that it would be 10 years in operation, another 5 years of backfilling it, another 5 years to allow the backfill to settle before it gets developed. Now it's been asserted that the resource is exhausted. Who gets to say that the resource is exhausted?
Madam Chair, just to be clear, there are two pits surrounding this site. The one is the site itself is known as the Brazil pit. The other one is one immediately to the north, known as the Drummond pit. Right. So the Drummond pit just got a confirmation from the Ministry of the Natural Resources and the Forestry that it is surrendered. Okay. So therefore, the development of residential to the nearby operations is not a concern anymore. So coming back to the site itself, the Brazil pit, there are two levels of documents that ensures the long-term protection of the aggregated resources. The first one is the provincial policy statement. So protecting the long-term provision of the aggregated resources is a provincial interest. And when the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry reviews the applicant's proposal to surrender the license, they would need to take that into consideration. And the ministry is proceeding their license surrender process, working with staff, clarifying with us that we need to draft approve it, and we need to provide the zoning before they can actually proceed the surrender of the license. That is very reasonable for staff to conclude that the ministry has no concerns for the land to be developed as residential uses. Okay. Secondly, the official plan has requirements to protect aggregated resource lands, and the applicant already provided sufficient studies by professional engineers indicating that remaining materials on the site are mostly sand and gravel, which is not unusual, which is common in Ottawa area, which means it doesn't deserve to be protected. The applicant further plans to rehabilitate the site with remaining materials. In our conversation with the ministry clearly stated they are aware of this plan, and they agree that this is actually a preferred option in terms of how the site can be rehabilitated.
Okay. So in the staff report, it notes that the mineral resource extraction operations were recently wound down as the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry had confirmed that the aggregate resources on the site have been exhausted. And I'm still coming back to that sentence from a couple weeks ago at council. It sounds like Ministry of Natural Resources have told the city that we are looking at, or sorry, it was planning committee, we're in the council chambers, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, the ministry actually, Madam Chair, the ministry confirms the license is surrendered or the license surrendering process has started.
Okay, so in this case, Ministry, MNRF has said that the license surrendering process has started.
Correct, and adding to that, the ministry never raised any concerns or any refutes the proposed development and any discussions of treating the land as being depleted.
Okay. At the end of that license surrender process, there is, I presume, a document that gets created. Somebody at MNRF signs and says it is surrendered?
Correct.
Okay, but that document is still to come after council implements a new zoning bylaw that allows for the residential.
Correct.
Okay. Those are my questions. I do wonder why under the OP designation section of the staff report it says the subject property is designated as general urban area according to Schedule B of the official plan, when Schedule B of the official plan still reads as community expansion area and gravel or resource area.
Madam Chair, it's acknowledged as a human error. If you look at the analysis was quoting the policies for urban expansion area overlay, as well as a sand and gravel area. Just a statement in that paragraph was incorrect.
Okay. I'm going to dissent on this one. I think the inclusion in the general urban area is subject to it being subject to the rigor of a CDP process, and I don't see the same level of rigor for this property as for the Mattamy Minto lands that were obviously very thoroughly studied in the expansion study area CDP. Thanks, Chair.
You may want to wait until the speakers come up because they actually, it's only in the last few months that they are now here. Come on up, Sue Murphy and Hugo Lalonde. Work for Kaivan, but they were Minto for a long time, so they can speak specifically to ease any of your concerns about what was done or not done. I'm sure Sue in particular would know about that if you have any other questions, but you've asked a lot of questions.
I will listen with interest.
So,
thanks.
Thank you, you're welcome. So anyone else have any questions? And certainly if you want to say anything, you heard what Councillor Lieber was saying, up to you guys. I don't see any other questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Myself and Hugo Lalonde were very involved in the CDP process, and this specific site came forward with a concept plan near in the 2.5 years out of the 3 years we did those studies, and we considered that we brought into the concept plan, we looked at it in terms of continuity with the land use plan and the pedestrian network, the road network. We also included in the master servicing study, therefore the sanitary water and stormwater management solution was determined through the master servicing study that was approved by council. So the servicing scenario for the lands were considered. As Lily mentioned, it went through and included into the CDP, the EMP, the Transportation Master Plan, and the MSS. And then any additional site-specific matters were addressed through the plan of subdivision, through the required studies through the subdivision, where more detail was provided in terms of the servicing solution, the environmental IER, the transportation impact study, et cetera.
Lily, would you follow up after the meeting and send the emails I was talking to Councillor Leeper about?
Absolutely.
So I think there were 3, but really good, solid, like you just heard Lily answering the questions, that all was laid out, and I don't think he's come back with any more since then, which was later yesterday, just so you know that. So I just want you to have that.
I'll dissent today, but I'm very open-minded to looking at it differently by council.
Sure. All right, anything else that you don't need to say? No other questions? Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming out today. So we do have a technical
Great. Thank you, Madam
motion?
Chair. Yes, this is all truly technical, so I'll just go ahead and read. Therefore, it be resolved that Planning Committee recommend council amend the staff report items in regards to 3809 Boriscaine Road as follows. 1, replace document 1, location map and zoning key with the revised attached document 1. 2, replace document 2, proposed zoning bylaw amendment with the revised attachment document 2. 3, replace the statement found in the section summary of request of zoning bylaw amendment proposal. The Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry has confirmed the aggregate resources on the site have been exhausted, with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry have confirmed that the pit license surrender process has been initiated. And 4, replace the statement, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry has deemed the site to be exhausted of aggregate no longer require protection found in the planning rationale section, with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry had confirmed that the pit license surrendered process has been initiated, and be it further resolved pursuant to the Planning Act, section 3417, no further notice be given.
Okay, does anyone have any questions on the technical motion? Have you seen the technical motion?
The revised documents 1 and 2, are those available to us to look at quickly before we vote? Thanks.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Moffat.
Just to get some clarity, so we know the process here, and I know this has been discussed because it was discussed a couple weeks ago. No development can occur on the site until such time that the MNRF goes through and evaluates the pit surrendering process, and then the city then confirms that with registration of the subdivision on the site, correct?
Correct, and any other conditions the applicant needs to satisfy.
Right. Thanks.
Good? No, it's not, I can tell. You have something else? Okay, thank you. Okay, so on the technical amendment, carried? Are you, hang on a minute. Are you ready for that, Councillor Leeper? Do you want us just to pause for a minute?
I'm comfortable now, yeah.
Okay, so on the technical amendment, carried. And on the report as amended, carried? Dissent, but maybe changing by council.
Well, yeah, check.
We're going to get to that, yeah, well, I'm going to make sure you get that. Lily will make sure you get that. And I'm sorry, Greg and James, I didn't see you were here, but I imagine that you're good with hello, right? Okay, thank you. Okay, so it's, don't have to worry about whether we're going to go long for lunch or anything. No in-camera items. Any notices of motion? Inquiries? Other business? Adjournment? We'll see you on February 27th. Sure. We're going right now.